Hello, everyone. Welcome to part two of our web coding series. And I guess we can just jump right in and get started. So just as a reminder of where we're at in our series, last week we went over HTML to add all of the content and all the structure to our website. But as we saw when we previewed it, it didn't look great. So we're going to change that today. We're going to start learning CSS, which is the coding language that we use for the web to change the styling of our HTML elements. This is going to include colors, fonts, layout, all of that fun stuff. CSS is a little bit more involved than HTML. You can do a lot with it, which is why we've split it up into two different workshops. Today, we're going to focus on a bunch of intro concepts, just getting you kick-started with CSS. And then next week, we're going to do some more kind of cool, intermediate, advanced stuff. All right. So Visual Studio Code, which is going to be the code editor that I'm going to be using. If you do want to follow along using the same exact code or text editor that I'm using, we do have a new set of starting files as well at this link on the screen. I also did write it up on the whiteboard. If you just type that link in, you'll get taken to a new Google Drive folder that has like a zip file, and you just go to the top right and do download, and that'll download that .zip file, and then you just double click on it in your Finder or File Explorer. You might, if you're on Windows, you right click on it and you do unzip or something. Most of the stuff in that folder is stuff that we learned last week. I did kind of just clean it up and update it so that it looks a little bit fresher. But there's like one concept in the HTML that we did not go over that I will just kind of reference. So while you either download Visual Studio Code, if you want to follow along one-to-one and or get access to our starting files, I'm just going to talk a little bit of an overview of what CSS is and why we use it and some things to know. So CSS stands for Cascading Style Sheets. And the term style sheets actually comes from the world of the printing press, where there was a document that would list all of the different style rules that they were going to use for printing. And the web development world just kind of took that term and is using it for themselves. The cascade is a little bit of a weird concept in CSS. So if you remember from last week with the HTML, we would nest our HTML elements inside of each other. So we had samples where we had our div element, our section, and then within our div, we put like an H2, a paragraph, an image, or there was even like we had our body section, and then within our body section, we had these different things. Where this works is if you apply a style to the parent element, which is that container, so the div, the body element, whatever, it will apply to all of the child elements, so all the stuff within. So just as you apply it to something that's at a more higher level container, it will go into its inside and apply it to all those as well. At a high level, CSS just describes how these HTML elements should be styled, how they should be displayed on a web page. And depending on how you add CSS to your website, there are three main ways to do so. If you do it in the way that we're going to be using, you can use one CSS document to style multiple web pages. Now, this is how we write CSS. So where in HTML we used elements, CSS uses rules. And a rule starts off with a little bit of code called a selector. And this is just basically the piece of code that is telling the browser, what HTML elements we want to style. We're going to learn a couple different selectors today. So in this case, we have the P selector. This is just that element of the paragraph text. And so this is selecting all of our paragraph text elements on an HTML page. Then following our selector, we have a declaration block, which is just a container for all of our style rules. And then we have one or more declarations. And this is all of those different style rules that we want to apply to the elements that we're selecting with our selector. Each declaration is made up of a property and then one or more values. So the property is the type of style that you want to change. In this case, color is going to be your foreground color. When you're applying that to text, it's basically your text color. And then the value is going to be the specific style that you're applying. So in this case, blue. So this little bit of code will select all of our paragraph body text and change its text color to blue. So this keyword of blue is one of about 140 named colors in HTML and CSS. What that means is that there are 140 colors that have this kind of just keyword name that you can input and get that color, and I'll show you where you can find a list of them all. But as you can imagine, there are more than 140 colors on the web. So you can also write your colors a bit more custom. One way to do that is using RGB. This is our red, green, and blue, and this is just a way to describe a color. That first number is how much red is in the color. The second number is how much green, and the last one is how much blue. And these can range from 0, which means none of that color, to 255 to like what the max amount is. The second option that I have listed adds this A channel. This stands for alpha, and this is just an opacity number. This is a number which is at the very end from between 0 and 1, where 0 is fully transparent, fully see-through, basically invisible, and 1 is fully opaque or fully colored. So this one where it says 0.5, it's about like half transparent. So you'll be able to see some stuff behind it. The second group is a little bit different. I don't use this one as much, but it's hue, saturation, and lightness. So hue is the first number. This is just where on a color wheel are you placing it. So 0 and 360 is red, and then 120 is green, and like 240 is blue. Don't have to remember all of that. You look up like, hey, I want this color, and I'll show you some different color options that you can do online, and then they'll give you these values. Saturation, this is a percentage between 0 and 100%, where 0 is like really gray, and then 100% is fully colored. And then lightness is going to be where 0 is fully dark, there's no light, so it's black. 100 is fully light, so it's going to be fully white. And then 50% is like the normal amount of color that makes something look like the hue. It's all confusing. I'll show you how to make it easier. And then we also do have the alpha channel, which is the opacity. This last one, which is really common, and this is one that we'll probably use a little bit today, is called a hex code. It's also hexadecimal. This is just a different way to write an RGB value. And again, you're not going to have to memorize all of these different color codes for the ones that you want. I'll show you how you can do a more user-friendly color picker and get these values. So now, when we start sizing our elements, right? When we were sizing images last week, when we were wanting to add space between stuff maybe today, there's all of these different units, which are just ways to measure this distance or space that you're doing. You can use absolute units. These include centimeters, millimeters, inches, pixels, points, and picas. These are just basically one number that you're providing into this, and it's an exact size that you're determining. Then we have a bunch of these relative units that get a little bit trickier. So our EM is going to be relative to the element's font size. REM is relative to the root element's font size. Every HTML document has this like invisible root element that we don't add ourselves, but you can kind of like customize what its default font size is. So if you know, for example, on default, you want it to be like 12 pixels of font size, but then you want to make something 24, you can do 2 REM. It's a little bit difficult, a little bit tricky. We're not going to worry about it too much. If you use a percentage, it's going to be relative to that parent element size. That's your container element. And then we have our VH and our VW. Last week, we learned about the concept of a viewport. So basically the screen size that someone's using to access your website. And if you want to use the user's viewport size as a unit, you can. And 1 VH is 1% of either the height or the width, depending on what you're doing. So if my viewport is my phone here, and I wanted to do 1 VH, it's whatever 1% of my width or 1% of my height is. And that will dynamically change depending on which screen size that you're using, right? Typically, when you're thinking of the viewport height and the viewport width, you're thinking in like, I want this to be like half of the user screen, or I want it to be a third. And then you can do either, 50 VH would be half, and then 33 would be a third, and so on and so forth. Now, you can add multiple different style rules to the same element. And CSS has this process to determine which one actually gets applied. And it's depending on how specifically you apply it. So least specific is using this universal selector, which is our asterisk. This just selects every single HTML element on this web page. Next specific is going to be our element selector. And this is going to be when you use that HTML tag as a selector. So in this case, I have H2 up here. This would select all of our H2 elements. And because this is more specific than our universal selector, if I were to have conflicting styles at the element and the universal level, the element one would take precedence, and the element one would actually be applied. And then we have classes and IDs. These are stuff that we can assign manually in our HTML. A class is going to be a grouping of different elements, where an ID is one singular specific one that you're targeting. And we'll get practice with all of these. There are 3 ways to add CSS to your HTML. This first one is going to be the one that we mostly do, where we use a link in our HTML page to link to a CSS document. And then it'll just take all of that CSS and apply it to that HTML page. This is how you use one CSS document with multiple HTML pages. You just have to put the link in for each one. The second one is in the head section of your HTML, that metadata section. You can input this style tag. And any of the CSS that you write in between your opening and closing style tags will be applied to that page. But it can't be applied to other HTML pages. It's unique to the one that you're writing it in. And then lastly, you can use the style attribute in HTML if there's like one element that you want to apply a custom CSS style for. So to open this folder in Visual Studio Code, I can just click and drag and move it down to my Visual Studio Code icon. Or, and this should be in pretty much any of your text editors, if you open it up, and it looks like I already had it open, but you can go File, Open Folder, and then you find where it was downloaded on your computer. Okay. So in our folder, I have our index.html file, which is a lot of what we did last week. I just cleaned it up. I do have another project page for us to play around with. And then under assets, it's just our audio, our images, our logo, and our video from last week. Not all of them are in our HTML. So I do want to point out the one thing I added to our HTML that we did not do last week. And you'll notice that within my body section that I have these tags of header, nav, main, and then footer down here. So these are very similar to these div tags that we went through last week very briefly, where they just group different elements together. So our footer groups in all of our footer elements, our header groups in all of our header, nav is a navigation menu, and main is our main content of our web page. Where this differs from the div element is that screen readers, for those with low or no vision, can better understand what this content is. They don't understand what a div is, why you're grouping these things together. But when you use these ones of header or nav or footer or main, that screen reader can better understand it. Okay, that's the only difference. They're just grouping stuff together. So what I would like for us to do is to add a new file into our Explorer over here. File, new file. In VS Code, there's this icon by my folder for new file, and we're gonna name it style.css. So just like .html is the file extension for our HTML files, .css is the one for CSS files. Pretty simple. In VS Code, if I control click on my style.css tab, I can do split right. And when I do that, I get a separate window over here of code. So I can have both my HTML file and my CSS file open. So the first bit of CSS code that I want us to learn how to write is those comments. Remember, we wrote some comments in our HTML to provide some notes. It's a little bit of a different syntax in CSS. So in HTML, we did the open caret, exclamation point, double hyphen. In CSS, to write a comment, you do the forward slash and then the asterisk. And then now anything you write after here will be a comment. So I'll just say, this is my CSS comment. And then to close it, you just do the same thing in reverse. So you do an asterisk and then a forward slash. Okay. So to start a CSS comment, you do forward slash asterisk, and to end one, you do asterisk forward slash. So now, even though our CSS file is within our project folder here, it's not linked to our HTML in any way. So we need to make sure that we link it together. So I'm going to go back to my HTML, and anywhere within our head section, you just create a new line, and we're going to use the link tag. So remember when we use link in HTML, this is we're associating files together. It's not a clickable link. Now we need to say what type of link that we're doing, and that's that rel attribute, which stands for relationship. And you do equals, and then within quotation marks, we're going to write in style sheet. And so this tells the code that we are linking to a CSS file. It is href. And we're going to do equals. The only one that's super important is with our new link to our CSS, just make sure that you have that period forward slash. So now let's test to make sure that our link is working, because apparently the ones that I wrote weren't. So let's make sure that they are. So we're going to use our universal selector in our CSS. So to do that, we're going to do our asterisks, and then we're going to do a space, and then we do our opening curly bracket, and then we have our closing one here. So we're now going to, I'm going to press enter for readability. So it should look something like this. And you're going to probably get something that says, hey, there's some issue here because we actually don't have any code written in here. So to change the background color of things, it's a super easy property. We just use background hyphen color. And then we're going to put a colon. And then I'm going to do a space, and I'm just going to put in the keyword black and then do a semicolon. So if you remember in HTML, some of these had these closing tags that you had to remember to do to make sure that things were happening. The tricky one that you have to remember to do is a semicolon at the end of every CSS rule, like this. So now if I save this and I go back to my preview and I refresh, I can see my background color for the entire web page changed to black. So that means that my CSS is linked properly. So obviously we don't want that because you can't read things. So I'm just going to delete this so that when we do visit our site, it looks fine again. So I want to show you some of these colors. So if you just Google search or wherever and just look up HTML color names, you'll get the full list of these keyword colors that you can use. And so this is gonna also show you that hex code, if these are any of the colors that you specifically want to use. But if you want to, you can use something like Adobe Color, and you can just move around your picker and find whatever color you want to use, and then you'll get the appropriate hex code here. If you hit the change color button on Adobe Color, you'll get the RGB values as well. And for those of you who are in my Figma series, I showed you this website, which I do for some projects, realtimecolors.com. And if you just hit spacebar a bunch of times, you get random color palettes that you see on a website. And if you find a color palette that you like, you can click on that color and you'll get that hex code available to you here. So I'm just going to find a color palette that I like from here and keep it up. I'm going to do this one. So I have all of my H2s with this font color of black. And so I'm going to change it to one that I've picked out from this real-time color site. I'm going to use this primary. And so it is this F51C51, but you can use whatever color you want to do. And I'm just going to Command C to copy it. So where we learned the background hyphen color changes the background color of our elements, to change the foreground color, the text color, we just use the keyword color. So if I want to select all of my H2 elements and only my H2 elements, I use that element selector, and that's just going to be the name of that HTML tag. So in this case, it's H2. I'm going to do space. So now this is going to select all of my H2 elements. I'm going to do my open curly bracket, and you either get your closing one or you might have to manually write it in. I'm going to do a enter just for readability, and I'm going to put color colon, and I'm going to paste in that color that I grabbed from that website. You can also just use whatever color you want. So you can either do your color keyword if it's one of these 140 colors, or you have to use one of these. I'm using hex codes just because that's what I have the most practice with and what I like the most, but you can use any of these different color formats. I will remember to add my semicolon. Again, remember that's the big thing in our CSS, and I will save it. And if I go back to my preview and I refresh, I'll see that my H2 elements have been changed to that color that I picked. So we have our color for our text color. We have our background color for the background. And then the last kind of color-ish related thing is opacity. So right now, all of our images are like fully opaque, which means that they're fully seeable. But let's say I wanted to make them like semi-transparent to see beneath them. I can use the opacity one. So if I want to select all of my images, I can use the image selector. So it's just the IMG. It's just the name of that HTML tag. And then for my CSS, I am going to use the property of opacity. And this will be a value between 0 and 1. So 0 is going to be fully transparent. You can't see it. 1 is going to be fully opaque, which is the default. And so if I put 0.5, for example, and then my semicolon, and remember to save, and I go back here and I'm going to refresh just to see it. And now because I set my opacity to be 50%, I can kind of see through it. The reason why it looks maybe a little funny is just our background is white, and so it just makes it look lighter. But if your background was black, it's probably going to make it look darker. It's just kind of like a mixing of the two, of your foreground and your background. So now fonts work a little differently than colors because everyone's computer, everyone's phone, everyone's tablet can pretty much display all of the colors possible. There is a slight, if you're really curious, every single kind of device does have what's called the color gamut, which is going to be the range of colors that it can use. But most of the colors, I'm going to probably guess to say 100% of the colors that you're going to use are going to be available to everyone. The color gamut only truly matters if you're kind of working with like projectors and cinema and stuff like that. Fonts, on the other hand, work differently. The font that you are using, whether or not it shows up for a user, depends on if that user has the font on their computer. So there is this handy website called cssfontstack.com. And this website has a collection of what are called web-safe CSS fonts. These are fonts that most computers come with installed. And you can see their name and then also how many of each operating system that has that font. So I am going to want to, let's say, change all of the fonts on my website. So I'm just going to make sure that I'm saved. And in my preview, I can see I just get that default HTML font, but let's change it. So I'm gonna pick Geneva for mine, and I want to select all of my text and change it to Geneva. So I'm just going to do the asterisk to select everything, space, and then I have my curly brackets. And then to change the actual font that you are using, it's the font hyphen family property. So font family is going to change the actual font, and I'm going to just type in Geneva, and it VS Code added some stuff for me. So just Geneva. And I am going to save. And then now if I go back to my preview, I can see that now my font is this Geneva font here. Now, as you can maybe guess by looking at this website, Geneva is on 99.64% of Mac computers, but only on 2.08% of Windows computers. So if someone on Windows who did not have this font installed tried to access my site, they're still going to see that default HTML font, which obviously we don't want. So what we're going to do is I'm going to set what's called a fallback font. This is a font that is going to be used if the user's computer does not have Geneva. Okay? So ideally now, because I picked one that has heavy Mac usage, I'm going to pick one that has heavy Windows usage. So I'm gonna pick this Trebuchet MS one right here. Now, the little bit of trick that you need to know is whenever there's a font name that has a space in it, if you were to just try to type it out, it's gonna look a little funky. So to add a fallback font after Geneva, I do a comma space. And then if I try to type in just Trebuchet MS, you'll notice that because I have syntax highlighting on, which highlights different parts of code depending on what type of code it is, it thinks that these are separate things. If I want to associate them together to make sure that it's a name, I just surround them in single quotes. So now what this does is it says select everything. If the user has Geneva installed on their computer, display the text in Geneva. If they don't have Geneva, install or use Trebuchet MS if they have that. And then if they don't have that one, then it's going to show that default HTML. So as you can see from this website, as we go back here, there's this category that I've been pulling from called sans serif and this category called serif here. So basically the serif is these, if you look at like this word big in Big Castlin, and the G has that like little extra hanging thing, or the L has like a little almost like line at the bottom. The T's might have that. Those are called serifs. And the sans serif fonts means without serif. And so it doesn't have those little extra decorations, whereas serif fonts do have those little extra decorations. So in the event that someone doesn't have Geneva or doesn't have Trebuchet MS, maybe I want to have just a generic font be displayed. The default one has been a serif, but I can change it to sans serif by adding another fallback font. So comma space, and then do the keyword of sans hyphen serif. So now what this does, looks for Geneva. If the computer has Geneva, it uses that. If it doesn't, it looks for Trebuchet MS. If it has that, it uses that. But if not, it just uses a generic sans serif font. Now, let's do a little bit more on like some specifics of like how do we make stuff bold? How do we make it italicized? How do we align some text and all of that fun stuff? So I'm going to go back up into my H2 block here. So after my color, after this semicolon, if I'm going to press enter, and we're going to use the font hyphen style property. Now VS Code, as I press in my colon, gives me some different options for here. The calc, inherit, initial, unset, and var ones are a little bit more advanced than what we're going to cover. So it's just the top three that we got to worry about. So there's normal, which is going to be your normal font. There's italic, which I think we all know what italicized text is. It's just kind of slanted. And then oblique is pretty much the same as italic, and I'm honest, I don't know the difference. So you're probably going to use normal or italic. So I'm going to type in italic and then do my semicolon. And if I save that and I go back and refresh, I'll see that my H2s are italicized. And that's this font style italic. Now, we also have font weight, so font hyphen weight. And you'll notice that I get a bunch more options here than before. So we have normal, we have bold, which is just bolded text. We have bolder, which is even more bold text. And we have lighter, which is a little bit more thin than normal for the size of our boldness. Then you'll notice that we also have 100 through 900. So you can get even more granular. Normal text is 400. The bold text, I believe, is 700, and bolder is 900. I believe lighter is around 200. So I'm just going to type in bold as our keyword. And if I save and I go back and I refresh, it's a little hard to tell. So maybe we'll do it for something else. Let's do it for our paragraph text. So I'm going to delete that there. I'm going to add paragraph. So just P, font, weight, bold. And then now, there we go. Now all my paragraph text is bold. Now the last pretty basic font thing that we're going to go through is the size. So right now, by default, our paragraph size is 16. It's kind of the default of the browser. If we want to change that, we can. So for our paragraph, to change the size of the font, you use font size. They do have these keywords of large, larger, medium, small, etc. Most people, including myself, just put in the specific value. So I might want to put, let's say, 24 pixels. So 24 and then semicolon, Command S, and I can go back and save, and I now see that all of my paragraph text is 24 pixels tall. So now let's go back to our code. I'm going to get rid of the stuff for the paragraph text just because I don't want it to look like that. And I want us to change some stuff about this paragraph right here in our about paragraph. So this is, let's say, a special paragraph that I want to style differently from our other paragraph text, where when we just did the P selector, and we are changing how if it was bold and what size, that applies to all of our paragraph text. But if I want to single this one out, we can do that. So the first thing that I need to do is go to that paragraph in my HTML. So this is found under the H2 of about, and we have the P element here. So to single it out, I'm going to assign it an ID, and we use the ID attribute for that. So I'm going to put a space at the end of the P and do ID equals. And then in between my quotations, I want to put some sort of identifier here. So I'm going to just put in about paragraph, but you can put whatever you want to do. Now make sure that you save your HTML file. And then if we want to single out this paragraph element in our CSS, we can access it by its ID. We just write the name of the ID, but before it, we put the pound symbol. So if we do pound, and then we're going to type in about hyphen paragraph, or whatever you put in your ID thing, this is how we specifically select that piece of paragraph text. And then now I can use my normal just declaration block and add my CSS rules here. What we're going to do for this one is I want to align my text. So you can have your left aligned text, which is the default like this, but maybe you want this text to be center aligned, or maybe on the right aligned or justified. This is how you change it using the text hyphen align property. And I want to center this, so I'm going to put center. And if I do save and I go back and refresh, I can now see that my text is now center aligned. So every line has the same amount on the left and the right from the center. All right. Now, if you want to add a sort of what's called a decoration, which is these extra lines to something, you can use that with the text decoration. So text hyphen decoration. And you'll notice that we have dashed, dotted, double, line through, overline, solid, underline, wavy. There's all these options of just adding different lines through either through our text or above it or below it. The most common one that you're going to use is underline. And so our underline text decoration is going to have our text underlined. If you want to change the color of that underlined, you just do text decoration hyphen color, and then you just do the colors that we already know and love. And so let's say this time I want to change it to red with that keyword, and I go back here, and then now my underline line is red. If I want to change the style from solid, where it's just a solid line, you can do text decoration style. And let's say I do dotted. There's also dashed, there's wavy, there's double. And so dotted now gives me that kind of dotted underline. And the last thing with our text decoration is we can do its thickness. The text decoration thickness. And here you'll want to use those units. So let's say I do like 5 pixels, and I might go back. And then now my text underline that is red and dotted is going to be 5 pixels tall. So we're going to move on to kind of the sizing of elements. And what I want us to do is to go back to, we can either do our preview file if you would like. You can also open up any website that you want in Google Chrome, because we're going to use that Chrome DevTools again. So I'm going to use my sample one. So I have it open up in Chrome. You can have any website open. I'm going to control click and click inspect. And this opens up what is called Chrome Developer Tools. We used it last time to see and play around with the HTML that makes up a website. Now we're going to use it for CSS. So here we have our styles, and you can see that we have the H2 ones that I wrote in and my universal ones, but you'll also notice that there's these ones that are italicized. These are ones that are coming from what's called the user agent style sheet. This is basically Google Chrome's default CSS styles. So whenever you're here and you see user agent style sheet or these ones that are italicized, this is coming from your browser. Now I want to focus in on our image right here. There's a really big image. So if I want to select that image in here, I use this tool at the top left of Chrome Developer Tools. It's like a dotted square and then an arrow. And then I can kind of hover over and click on an element. So I'm going to click on my image, and I want us to pay attention to this colorful square over here on the right. This is what is called the CSS box model. And this is how you determine what size an element takes up on your page. So this blue one right here, where it says 5280 by 2970, this is our width and our height. Okay, so this is the actual size of the image. Then we have what is called padding. And this is any sort of white space or blank space that is in between our content and a border. And your border is either an invisible or visible line around your element. Okay, so in this case, we don't have any padding. We have 0, 0, 0, 0 all around. We don't have any border. It's invisible, 0, 0, 0, 0 all around. And then outside of our border, we have our margin, which is going to be our distance between this element and other ones based on their borders, which is also 0, 0, 0, 0 all around. So we're going to go back to our code because I want to change all of my images to be the same size. But you'll notice a couple of things, right? If I go to a different image, it has a different size, which is fine. But we also do have our image of test logo up here. This is also an image. But I don't want to change this image size. I just want to do these thumbnail images. So just like we assigned an ID to our paragraph, we can assign a identifier for multiple elements. So I'm going to head down to under my projects, and I have my image, my first one here, and I'm going to add a new attribute called a class. So a class is going to be just like our ID, where it's a unique identifier for our elements, but this time we can use it to identify multiple elements. So I'm going to do class equals, and then I can use a whatever I want to do. So I'm just going to do project hyphen image. Now I want this to be on all of my other project images. So I'm going to just highlight over class equals project image and Command C to copy. And then I'm just going to go to my other images and add them there. So I'm adding the same exact class equals project image to all of my images in my project section. I'm going to hit save. And then now I'm going to go back to my CSS file. And to target our class, it's very similar to our ID where we use the pound symbol, but this time we're going to use a period. So period, and then I'm going to put in project hyphen image. So what I input in over here. And then now this selects every element that has an attribute of class equals project image. And I'm going to do a width, I'm going to put 100%. So this is going to say find every single HTML element that I have class equals project image and set its width to 100% of the screen. And when I hit save and I go back, I can see that now my image takes up the full width of the screen. So does this one. And it's going to preserve its aspect ratio. So it's still going to look good, but it doesn't impact our logo one here. You can also set your height here. You might have to play around with which one you want to do. You could probably do like fit content. Each image might have a slightly different one. So now, as we saw in that box model, we have our size, and then there's that padding, which is that white space or blank space on the sides. We can do padding, and then you have a couple different options here. We're just going to worry about these top 5. So we have padding left, bottom, right, and top. These are if you want to set the blank space for those specific sides of the element. So if I were to do padding left, let's say for all of these, and let's say I put in 50 pixels, so 50, and I save, I'm going to see that I now have this 50 pixel thing of our blank space on the left side of our images. If I were to change that padding hyphen left to, let's say, padding hyphen bottom, and I save, and I go back, I now have that same amount of blank space, but beneath each of them. Now, if you don't want to set each individual side every time, because they're all going to be the same value, let's say, you can just use padding. So just padding colon, and this sets for all 4 sides at the same time. And if I save and I go back, I now have it top to the left and on the bottom. And then there is some on the right. I just have to scroll because it's extending my screen. Okay, so that's our padding here. Now let's add a border. So just like with our padding, we have our border top, left, right, and bottom. So this is if you want to add those lines to the top, left, bottom, or right of your element. Or you can just use the word border for the shortcut. So for border, you first start off with how thick you want your border to be. So let's say I want it to be 5 pixels, and then I'm going to put a space, and then you want to put what type of border you want. Just like we did with the underline where there's solid, and then there was dotted and dashed and wavy and all of that, the same ones apply here. So I'm going to put solid because I want a solid line, and then I'm going to put another space. And then now you specify the color that you want for the border. So I'm just going to do the keyword blue this time. So with our border shorthand, the first value you do is the size or thickness. The second one that you do is going to be the type or the style. And then the last one that you do is the color. And if I save, I now have my solid 5 pixel blue border that surrounds all of my project images. And you can see where that padding comes into play too. We have that blank space, that padding between our actual content and the border. Now you can get super granular. So you could do border width is that first one. So that size. There is your border style, which is that second value. So solid, dashed, wavy, and then border color. You can also specify separately as well. You can also do it per side, right? So you see border top color, border left color. There'll also be a border right width, a border bottom width. You can get really granular if you would like. The last one I want to show with our border, which you might have seen, is our border hyphen radius. This is how curved we want our borders to be. Right now, they go to a point, so they're sharp. But let's say I want it to be curved, I want it to look a little bit more modern. I can set border hyphen radius to something. So let's say I do 10 pixels and I save. I go back here. It's now curved by 10 pixels. And if I increase that value, let's say I go to 100, it's going to be even more curved. You'll notice it also does apply to our image here too. Our last sizing thing for now is going to be that margin. So that's going to be the distance between our borders on our elements. So with our margin, I also do get margin top, margin left, margin right, and margin bottom. If I want to specify the specific distance, or I can just do the margin keyword to do them all at once. So I'm going to do margin to 50 pixels and save. And then now you see that I have a 50 pixel margin all around. I have my border, a 50 pixel padding, and then I have my actual image. You can see there's a ton of different ways on how you can kind of figure out sizing of your elements. And if I open this up in Chrome DevTools now, and I select my image, I can see that all of my values have updated there too. So my margin is what I set it to at 50. My border width is at 5, like I said it. My padding is also at 50. I'm going to show you one little trick and then I'll pause for questions. So you may have noticed that if I were to get rid of my padding, border, and margin, and I say width is 100%, so I want this image to stretch across the screen, I do have a little bit of a margin here, a little bit of white space here, and a little bit of white space over here. So I can use Chrome DevTools to figure out why this is happening. So I can just go to all of these different elements and try to see where that might be coming from. If I click on our body, you'll notice that there's an 8 pixel margin on the left and the right. And under my styles tab, I can see that that's coming from my user agent style sheet, which means that by default, Google Chrome adds an 8 pixel margin on the left and an 8 pixel margin on the right. Now I can reset that. Whatever CSS code that I'm writing will overwrite what Google Chrome does. So all I have to do is do my body tag to target, it's all of my body elements, but there's only one. And I'm going to set the margin to 0. So margin colon 0, semicolon. And then now it gets rid of that 8 pixel white margin. And so now my image does truly stretch across the whole screen. Everything else will also move over there, but at least my images are now full screen. So we got some more stuff that we can cover. So you'll notice that my navigation menu, I do have about, projects, and contact like we did last week. And they are all lists, so they get this bullet list right here. Let's say I don't want these bulleted, these bullet points. You can change that. So what I want to do is I want to target my list here. In this case, I can just do UL to target my unordered list. And then to change that bullet, it's going to be list style type. And there's all of these different options here. If you wanted to do a circle, a decimal, you can do symbols, you can link to an image if you want to put images there. But I'm just going to put none, and then that's going to get rid of those bullet points. Next week, we'll go through the thing that shows how we can style them and like position them to be put over here. So again, to remove those bullet points, you target your list and then do list style type and you set it equal to none. Okay, now if I am over here, we have my test logo up here in the top left. And it is a link, and we can know this from a couple of different ways. So one, we can go to our code and we see that my image for my test logo is surrounded by with a link to itself, which means that when you click on it, it just reloads the page. So our image links to our homepage, the index.html. And so when I click on it, it just refreshes. But maybe I want something more visual. Right now, if I hover over it, you do see that the cursor does change, but that might not be super noticeable. Maybe I want the background to change color to show that it's, it's a clickable link. So to do that, you can do your A tag. So this is going to target all of our links. You could also do your images if you want to. And then I'm going to put a colon here and then put the word hover. So what this syntax says, this is what is called a pseudo class. So we did our own custom classes before when we did class equals project image. In CSS, there's these things called pseudo classes, which are things that you don't have to define in the HTML. It just knows when it's happening. And one of those is hover. So you put the elements that you're targeting, and then you do a colon hover. And this is going to be when you're hovering over these elements, make this style change. So I'm going to change the background like we did before. So background hyphen color. And let's pick one of my other colors from this site, maybe this sea foamy green. I'm going to place that in here. So now this code says for any of my links, when I'm hovering over it, change its background to this color. And now when I go back and I refresh, if I hover over, it'll highlight in green. It's a little funky because of where the image actually is. It looks a little bit better with text. So let's actually do that so you can see it. So I want to do my title. So where it says Digital Lounge, we're going to change that instead. So instead of A1 hover, we're going to do H1 hover. So this is going to be when you're hovering over your H1 elements. And I'm just going to change the color, not the background color, to this here. So H1 colon hover is going to be when I'm hovering over one of my H1 elements. I'm going to change its text color to this. And now if I refresh, I can see when I hover over, it changes its color. So now, before we go any further with CSS, we have our index.html file. And you'll notice that under projects, under my first image for my first project, that I have this button for view project linking to this other HTML page. So if I go here, I'll refresh just to make sure. Under the H2 of certification courses, if I click on view project, I'm taken to my certification courses.html page. But you'll notice that none of my CSS applies here. So in order to do that, we have to make sure that we're linking to our style.css file. So I'm going to go and open up my certification.html project page. And in my head section, I am going to put in my link with the relationship of style sheet and our href equals, but you'll notice if I do my period / I only get my current page. If you want to go back in our folder structure, so right now we're within project pages. If we want to go up one more, we do a double period. So period / and then now I get that beginning. And so then I can say link to my style.css. And if I close off this caret and I refresh, or I save first, and then I go back and I refresh, all of that CSS code that I did, changing the font, changing my H2, changing the italicize, that all applies here. And that's because I just went over to my other page and I linked it to that style sheet. Obviously, we didn't add any IDs or classes to this page. So if you wanted to make those further edits, you would do that. You have to add them manually in here as well. There's one last thing I want to cover today. And to do that, we are going to use our nav section in our index.html. So our nav section is going to be this right here. But just to make sure I want us to be able to see it, we are going to put nav and then set your background color to something. I'm going to set mine to just green. So nav is set background color to green. Now when I go, I can see where my nav section is right here. I want to show you a little bit about positioning. So when I put in position and I put in a colon, we have all of these different options right here. The first one I want to talk about is static. So static is your default option. If you don't apply position to these elements, static is what is used. And when a browser goes through your code, it goes through line by line, and the flow of those HTML elements determines how they are displayed, which is just on top and going down the file. Static just means position my element based on the order that you see it in the HTML. Now, we also have relative right here. So if I type in relative and I save and I go back and I refresh, nothing's changing yet. Basically, what we are saying to the browser is we're going to change the positioning of our nav element here based on where it currently is. So currently it's right here, but we can move it around. So I am going to use the keyword top for the property. You can also use left, right, or bottom. The trick about these, which is a little confusing at first, is this is the direction that you're heading away from. So when I say top and I put in 15 pixels, I am moving 15 pixels away from the top. And so if I save that and I go back here and I refresh, you'll notice that it moved down by 15 pixels. And just to make it even more obvious, I'm going to put it at 100 and save. So right now it's 15 pixels from the top of where it was. I increase it to 100, so when I refresh, it gets moved down. So this is relative to where it is in the flow of the document.
That is for navigation.
We're using it on navigation, but you can use it on whatever. The one with the navigation menu that a lot of people also do use is instead of position relative, we do position fixed. So if I save that one, and we'll show you what that looks like. So it does get taken out of the flow of the document. So what that means is that it no longer to the browser is placed right here. It's a little confusing because we see it right there, but basically we're kind of telling the browser disregard that. It's there in our code, but don't show it like it's there. But now as we scroll, it stays wherever we're scrolled. So for navigation menus, a lot of times people will make a navigation menu at the very top. They'll do position fixed, and then as you scroll, that navigation menu will stay on top there, no matter where you are in your positioning. The last thing that I will show you is we have our position fixed right here, and it's taken out of the flow and it's showing on top of our other elements. But maybe we don't want it to show on top of our other elements. We want it to be behind for whatever reason. While to our eye, it looks like everything is on the same layer, we can change that. So to do that, we use what is called a Z index. So Z hyphen index. And if you think of this, if you remember from like algebra, the x-axis is from the left to the right. The y-axis is from the top to the bottom. There's also a z-axis that is front and back. So even though this is like a flat screen here, we can simulate depth in our elements by using this. So if I do z-index, you'll just do it in terms of a number. So if I do -1, this is generally indicating that I want it to be on the -1 layer. It's some like abstract number. It doesn't really mean much. And now if I save it and I go back, you'll notice that it's behind all of my other elements. To determine what goes on top of one another, it just looks at which number is greater. So if I set all of my other elements to -2 and I set this nav menu to -1, that nav menu would still show on top of everything else because -1 is greater than -2. But let's say I set everything else to 50 and my nav was still at -1. -1 is less than 50, so it's going to be behind. That's all the information from me. We'll be back here same time, same day next week, and we'll just keep expanding our CSS knowledge.